And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into tonight's recap of the Detroit Pistons versus the Utah Jazz, I want to make sure to remind you guys to like and subscribe. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. If you like our content, hit that thumbs up button and turn on your post notifications on, because if you don't typically tune in to our Revved Up recaps, you have to keep in the know with everything that's going on with the Detroit Pistons. And in order to do that, you can turn on your post notifications so that every time we have any type of activity on our YouTube channel, you will get notified. Also, if you aren't as so much into the long form podcast content, you can follow us on Instagram. And if you just subscribe on YouTube, you will get our reels and clips on every social media platform. So if you're not into watching a 25-30 minute video, you can look at our clips and you'll get the gist of a lot that's going on with the Pistons right now, as we post around 4 to 5 times a week. So make sure to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube Reels. Also, this week we talk about couple trade proposals and what we might see with some trades. And also we talk about this week, actually, we talk about Ausar Thompson and we evaluate his first 25 games with the Detroit Pistons. So if you're kind of wondering where we are at when evaluating Ausar and if we're happy with his play, we talk about the specific statistics again with him, like going up against other rookies. So if you want to kind of get in the know with all the little intricacies with Ausar Thompson, make sure to tune into that episode. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's recap of the Pistons versus the Utah Jazz. Tonight's final score is 119-111 in the Utah Jazz's favor. We saw the Jazz tonight not have all of their players in. They have a couple guys struggling with injuries, Jordan Clarkson, Lauri Markkanen, Keontae George, a couple others in there that are dealing with some injuries. But Ryan, when talking about this game as a whole, what it really comes down to is not being able to get stops in the fourth quarter. The Pistons, with 2.5 minutes left in the game, pulled the score within 3 with the Utah Jazz, but then guys like Kelly Olynyk, Colin Sexton really came in clutch for the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, Kelly Olynyk had a great welcome back to Detroit moment for Utah tonight. He finished with 27 points, 4 steals, 6 assists, 3 boards, 100% at the line, making 4 free throws, 3 of 6 from 3, and then 10 of 16 from the field in 35 minutes played. He put on a clinic tonight. There's a reason for that, because he is by far one of the best shooting big man in the league today.
Right.
I loved when he was on the Pistons and what he contributed on a nightly basis, because he was a go-to guy. But with that being said, like, there's not a lot of guys, not a lot of big men per se, that can guard outside the 3. And when you're dealing with a Kelly Olynyk type player, you need to guard them 24/7. You need to be up on them. Because realistically, he's not going to blow by you. That's not his signature move. He's either going to shoot it right in your face or he's going to look the pass right away. And it's just, Wiseman, he is truly fast enough to guard Kelly Olynyk out there. He really is. He's afraid of getting beat, but I'm like, dude, you're not going to get beat by Kelly Olynyk. Stu is afraid to guard out there sometimes too. But what it really came down to, outside of the masterpiece of Kelly Olynyk, was the fact of, it really started when there was the foul called on Marvin Bagley, in which John Collins, that was clearly an offensive foul. He literally went down, lowered his shoulder, and lunged at Marvin. And then Ivy got called for the foul after. It was kind of weird because Collins initially couldn't get the budge on Marvin. So then he went back down, lunged at Ivy, and then went back down, and then lunged at Marvin, and then got a call out of it. But it was fully an offensive foul. In that moment, I'm actually shocked that Monty did not challenge that, because you had the timeouts available to. At that point in time, there was 3 minutes to go, which is not under the 2-minute mark. which, because under the 2-minute mark, you can't challenge a play. It has to play on. But it was ahead of that. So it's like, Monty, why aren't you challenging this? And then also, wouldn't you think the officials would maybe take a second look at it? Because it's like, that's a big play when it matters the most, and they're not doing anything about it. But that really was the momentum change, because then all of a sudden the Pistons just gave up. It was evident. And that's what really bugged me outside of their defense tonight in that fourth quarter, is just the fact that they were competing all night long, and then all of a sudden it didn't go their way, and then they gave up.
Yeah, and one thing that makes this game and this loss sting even more is that we saw in the first half the Pistons really compete with the Utah Jazz. The Pistons at one point early in the second quarter were on a 22-9 run against the Jazz. So it's like, we know this team was very beatable. It just comes down to the little things in the late stretches of games that the Pistons are still struggling with getting stops, because Asar Thompson just isn't that dominant defensive player yet, but he might be at one point. And we just don't really have that guy to really rally our defense quite yet, especially with the absence of Jalen Duren. But as far as paint players playing well tonight, Marvin Bagley, I was really happy with his outing tonight. He really took advantage of the Jazz not having Lauri Markkanen. He had 22 points, 5 rebounds, 10 of 12 shooting, and then not much on the defensive end. But offensively, Marvin Bagley was very consistent throughout the game, and was a key player for the Pistons tonight to keep it this close.
Yeah, the paint was wide open. We're going to be talking about John Collins here, and then in this this Saturday in our trade talk episode. Little spoiler alert there.
Yeah.
But John Collins there's not much he could have done, and that's just because of the matchups. There were certain switches where he got switched out of the paint, and then that left Marvin Bagley in a wide open, pretty much having Colin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, all those guys guarding him, and that's a mismatch. And Bagley used that to his advantage tonight. And it's evident. I mean, you missed 2 shots all night long, played 31 minutes. You had a great game. I really loved the play out of Bagley. He's been on a tear lately. He's been having some pretty solid games that he's been putting together. But the downside is these games that he's throwing together that have been decent lately, it's all scoring. It's not everything else. And I believe, honestly, if he did a little bit more of the everything else stuff on top of what he did scoring the ball tonight, this game
Right.
would have been much closer than it was at the end. And my big player in this, outside of Bagley, is Jaden Ivey. Jaden Ivey came to play. As Greg said, it was pretty much Jaden Ivey Purdue edition tonight.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't seen this type of player since he was in college. And then even last year, there were times where it's like, oh yeah, this is Jaden Ivey. And he really came to play tonight. He brought the energy, like defensively too. Because I keep making that comment about him lately, is his defense has been amazing. Tonight, he finished with 3 blocks and 2 steals. Like, you can't get better than that. He's starting to become more defensive minded than offensive minded, which I've noticed lately, which is a big positive, because we need more defenders on our team. But it's a big positive to me in the sense that he's recognizing that he may not get these opportunities offensively that he once had last year. So what
Right.
can I do to stay on the floor? What can I do to stay on the court all the time? Play defense. And he's doing that, especially tonight. And I'm excited to see where this goes, because he's been on a tear offensively as of late and defensively.
Well, and that's the thing with Jaden Ivey. We know that when he's playing his best brand of basketball, it's when he's being active and moving around and using his speed and athleticism to his advantage, because then that leads to good offense, leads to solid, stout defense. And that's the key for Jaden. It's just over an 82 game schedule. it's hard to do. You know, some nights there's back-to-back games and you're guarding the opposing team's best guard. And so it's hard. But now that the Pistons have been having like the last, 5 to 6 days, they haven't had that many games. I think it has to do with just a rest thing. He's well rested, and then he's just coming out and bringing the energy and very active. And I agree with you. Jaden Ivey is playing a high brand of basketball right now. And I hope to see him kind of pile up a couple games here, because we know that the schedule these next 5 to 6 games are going to be tough after this Utah Jazz game. So hopefully we can see an upset in the next 3 to 4, whatever many games it is. And I think whenever the Pistons do get their next win, Jaden Ivey is going to be a big part of it. Another guy, I mean, the Pistons didn't play terrible tonight, but I have a couple negatives that I think that, other than defense, it kind of reason we lost. But as a positive I want to talk about is Cade Cunningham. Tonight he played really solid. 28 points, 7 rebounds, 10 assists, 10 of 22 shooting. Struggled from the 3-point line here and there, but he got 2 steals and a block. Cade did everything for the Pistons tonight. And it's the second game in a row where he's just kind of controlling the game. Everything on both sides of the court, everything's just really going through Cade, and he's playing at a high level right now. He just needs some help, and elite help. So, Ryan, what were some of your first thoughts when watching Cade Cunningham go up against the Jazz tonight?
Cade was early on when he started off with the 4 assists right off the gate, without even taking his own shot. That spoke volumes as to where this game is going to go. I knew he was going to have a solid night, and it shows you how unselfish he's starting to become, more so than not lately. And it's very good to see when you're passing early. When guys take their own shot over others, majority of the time, it never ends up well. There you might have the fluke of you have a phenomenal night yourself, but everybody else has a bad game, but you still win the game. Like that
Right.
doesn't happen too often. And Cade recognized that the other night out. I mean, he had dropped his career high in points of 43, and they still lost. So he recognized, hey, I got to do more than just score the ball. I got to be everywhere. I got to pass the ball. I got to have a better defensive presence. I got to control the game more and give opportunities to others in order to win. And he did that tonight. But I do have one critique, if anything, on him tonight was that fourth quarter stretch. Earlier on, before you hit the 2-minute mark or so, he was having costly turnovers at the wrong time. And it wasn't just the turnovers, but he was forcing his shots up. And I understand you're the guy and you need to look for your shot from time to time, but there were others that were clearly open and you forced your shot. And that's my little teeny tiny negative of tonight. Uh, because like you have 6 turnovers on the night. That's not good. You shouldn't even have 5, let alone 6. And I understand it because you have the ball in your hands all the time. But still, if he didn't have those costly misses and or turnovers in that earlier fourth quarter stretch, and it was the ball kept moving and we kept getting good looks like we did beforehand, I honestly think we would have won this game. It was when that happened, and then others started missing shots, and then we dug ourselves in a hole again, and Utah just kept hitting the shots when it mattered the most. But that was my one big negative about Cade tonight, was when it mattered the most, it seemed like he was forcing his hand.
Yeah, and to your point about turnovers, before we wrap up tonight's recap, we saw last outing with the Pistons against the Hawks, they only had around 9 to 11 turnovers, I believe. Tonight they had 20, and Cade had 6 of those 20. And like you mentioned, they came in terrible times, when crucial moments, when you're trying to solidify a comeback and there's these turnovers. So I was hoping, following the Atlanta Hawks game, seeing they only had 9 turnovers, I was hoping they would kind of keep building on that and slowly start to kind of um, lean wean off of the turnovers. But then we see them have a 20 turnover outing, and I think that's really one of the biggest things that done them in against the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, because when they started off the game, they were on a tear. Like the ball was flying all over the place. Their transition offense was amazing. They were making smart plays. Like that was probably the best basketball we've seen them play all season
Right.
long, and it was that first quarter stretch to start off
Mhm.
the game tonight. And then they kind of like took their game away from that and tried to slow it down and follow the speed of the Jazz, and it just wasn't working. And then towards the end, they started going back into it more, but at that point in time, it's already too late. And going into it, Greg mentioned, I believe it was going into halftime. We had what 18 turnovers, and he's like, I want to limit them to at least 2 more turnovers max,
Right.
and we win the game. And they got 2 more turnovers, and we lose. Um, but it's just one of those things where we saw this team competing all 3 quarters up until the very end. And then once it started to not go their way, they gave up. And I really believe, based off what we saw all night long, this team can win. They can win games. Maybe not 25 in a row, like our losing streak, but they can still win games. And that's a big bright spot to me outside of the fact that we're talking about turnovers right now, which cost them the game, arguably. But if they just didn't have these costly turnovers when it mattered the most, this game would have been won.
That will do it for tonight's recap of the Detroit Pistons versus the Utah Jazz. Tonight's final score was 119 to 111. Saturday night, the Pistons will go up against the Brooklyn Nets and see if they can snap their 25-game losing streak. We are looking forward to talking to you guys after that matchup. We will see you guys in the next Revved Up recap. Peace.